Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gibbs Stewart, and I'm the CEO of Austmine, and I have the pleasure of being your host for today's webinar, which is titled, as you can see, "The Urgency of Modern Mining is Now." I am joining you today from Gadigal country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we all live and work, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We're very pleased to be partnering with ABB on this webinar, which will focus on the findings from a global mining sustainability report which ABB commissioned. This report, called the Real Progress Mining Report, features insights from over 400 mining professionals across 9 regions, including Australia, where 75 executives participated. Today, we will be focusing on the findings of those 75 executives in Australia to provide you with a preview of the results in anticipation of the full report, which will be released later this month. Now, to obtain a copy of this report during the presentation, a QR code will be shared, and you can register for the report while the webinar is live. Also, after the webinar, you will receive an email from us, which will invite you to register for a copy of the report, so you will automatically receive it once it is released. I'd now like to introduce Stuart Cowie from ABB, who will present some of the key findings of the report. Following his presentation, he will be joined by Sarah Coleman from Adobe, and we'll have a discussion about the findings and look at what some of the key trends are. Stuart Cowie is the head of ABB Australia's Process Industries business, where he oversees ABB's automation and electrical solutions across industries such as mining, metals production, pulp and paper, and cement. So, Stuart, we're really excited to hear about the findings, and over to you. Yeah, Stuart, you're on mute. Can't hear you.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Thank you, Stuart.
I said thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. As Chris already stated, we commissioned research for a global mining report focused on sustainability and decarbonisation in the mining industry. As Chris also stated, the research involved interviews with over 400 decision makers from mining companies across 18 countries, and it gives us valuable insights into both current practices and future trends. So throughout the research process, ABB maintained anonymity. Participants didn't know which company was behind the research. And today we're going to share an insight into the Australian results only. The full results will be available at a later date, as Chris already mentioned. So you're probably thinking, what inspired ABB, a global electrical engineering company, to focus on the Australian mining industry in our sustainability report? I think this will become more apparent as we discuss the data, but as you know, the mining sector here in Australia remains a global leader in commodity production. And according to the market research arm of S&P Global, it plays a critical role not just in our national economy, but impacts on a global scale as well. In Australia specifically, we surveyed 75 mining executives to understand where industry stands, what needs to be done, and how technology can potentially facilitate this decarbonisation transition. Of course, all the while maintaining financially viable mining operations. So as I said, the surveys were conducted anonymously to ensure that we obtained an unbiased response. So now, why does sustainability matter, and how did Australia compare to the rest of the world? Well, 50% of Australian mining businesses anticipate either significant transformation or indeed a total transformation of their operations over the next 5 years. This implies a very strong commitment to advancing technology, sustainability, and workforce management. Our 50% in Australia compares to an aggregated global result of 53%, so we're pretty much aligned with the rest of the world. We're making progress, and the intention for change is definitely there. but we do have a long way to go. From the survey, we see that the key drivers for change in Australia align very well with the global trends around safety, ESG demands, and regulatory pressures. When considering the role of technology in decarbonisation, interestingly, 70% of global respondents believe that we can make huge strides towards decarbonisation with the technologies that we already have and know today. But of course, the big question is, how do we meet the urgent need for change without negatively impacting profitability of mining operations? So let's talk about the key trends shaping this transformation. And firstly, ESG priorities. These factors are becoming central to the Australian mining sector. For example, 57% of companies say that health, safety, and well-being are top ESG priorities. 55% mentioned in the survey that quality employment is considered the most important. When it comes to the decarbonisation methodology, 40% of companies are adopting an incremental approach, as opposed to the others who have taken or are taking a holistic whole-of-mine approach to transforming their processes. This means that those following the incremental approach are focused on transforming individual assets or sub-processes and then gradually working towards achieving their ESG goals. Another critical trend is electrification, particularly in relation to mine haul vehicle fleets. Electrification is seen as a key part of decarbonisation efforts. In fact, 36% of Australian mining companies aim to electrify at least a quarter of their fleets by 2030. And on the broader technology front, companies are also focusing on implementing technological changes in areas like their mineral processing, ventilation, and grinding applications. But remarkably, 76% of respondents believe that an integrated approach to electrification, automation, and digitalization will be essential for achieving a sustainable transformation. The choices driving the approach to transformation often come down to the availability of skilled resources and an industry-wide hesitance to be the first to trial new technologies. But whatever the approach, collaboration is key. A staggering 71% of respondents say that partnerships across the mining ecosystem are crucial to achieving decarbonisation goals. Now, while these trends are really encouraging, we also need to acknowledge the barriers and challenges that the industry is facing, both locally and globally. One of the biggest hurdles is around the limited availability of expertise and skilled workforce. So almost half, 48% of the industry is grappling with a shortage of skilled talent. But there is room for optimism here, in that 74% of companies are committed to reskilling their workforce, and 60% believe that technology can actually drive better diversity outcomes and will also attract more much-needed Gen Z talent to the mining industry. There's a great example from Goldfields here in Australia, where they focused on addressing talent shortages and how the implementation of a digital operations management system has had a very positive impact. This case is not only interesting for the advanced technology aspects, but demonstrates how the right approach, aided by technology, can help close those skills gaps. Another challenge is investment and infrastructure. Transitioning to sustainable practices often requires substantial upfront capital. 50% of Australian operators cite investment requirement as a barrier. 53% are concerned about inadequate infrastructure. For some, it's about grid limitations for electrification. For others, it's the need for high-speed networks across mine sites to support digitalization and automation. But I guess increasingly it's going to become about both. And of course, commodity price volatility is another obstacle. While Australia is a significant player in global mining, we're also heavily integrated into global markets. So shifts in demand can create uncertainty, making it harder to plan and invest in long-term sustainability. Finally, there's the risk of unproven technology. 39% of companies see untested technologies as a barrier to transformation, and 44% worry about the disruption it could potentially cause to their operations. It's a delicate balance between innovation and maintaining stability of the operations, they say. So where do we go from here? The reality is that 32% of Australian mining companies admit they're behind schedule on their decarbonisation goals. But looking forward, 39% of Australian mining companies anticipate significant transformation and investment in sustainability solutions within the next 5 years. There's actually a real sense of optimism here. Mining executives are actually quite excited about the opportunities for mining. And these opportunities that I'm referring to here are associated with supply of resources needed for green technologies to the market to meet the needs across every other industry's decarbonisation journey. So clearly mining is no longer being seen just as part of the problem, but actually as a critical part of the solution. In fact, 82% of respondents in Australia are excited about the opportunity to supply the materials needed for this green transition. Now, whereas Australian mining executives are reasonably confident in their ability to meet long-term decarbonisation targets, it's clear from their responses that collaboration will be crucial. At the end of the day, no company can achieve all this alone. Partnerships both within the mining ecosystem and across industries will be key to success. So in closing, the transformation of the mining industry is not just necessary, it's critical, and there's an urgency to make progress rapidly. Significant shifts are expected by 2030, and even more progress will be needed to hit those all-important 2050 targets. But clearly, mining is absolutely essential to a green future. We can't do it in isolation. 67% of companies agree that appointing expert integrators or key technical suppliers is critical to coordinating the planning and implementation of new technologies. Technology will be a significant contributor towards sustainability for the mining industry. Now, as mentioned earlier, the data discussed here was a subset of the report focusing specifically on the Australian results, and you're the first to hear them. The full report covers survey results across 18 countries globally. I'm pleased that we'll be able to share that full report, and it will launch either next week or towards the end of the month. As Chris said, to register and receive a copy of the full results, please click on the QR code on your screen or click on the link in the chat box. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Coming off mute here. Thank you very much, Stuart, and some very interesting results there. I really look forward to seeing the whole report because you've collected a lot of great data there. And it is extremely timely, actually, with what's happening in the industry, particularly following Mine Expo, which there were a number of major announcements made regarding partnerships, regarding decarbonisation that are set to move the dial even further. So let's drill down into some of this a bit more. And I'd like to introduce Sarah Coleman. And Sarah is the Chief Executive Officer of Adoba. And Adoba, for those of you who don't know, is a digital transformation company dedicated to solving the toughest challenges for the mining industry and beyond. So really a perfect person to be involved in this discussion today. So welcome, Sarah. So let's talk about some of these findings. And sorry, before I ask my first question, I'll ask the first question, and then in the Q&A box, which you can see on the bottom of your screen there, you, the audience, are welcome to answer questions as well. And so we'll be fielding those as we go along. So Stuart, you touched on some of the barriers in this journey, and I'm just wondering if we can flip it on the other way and talk about some of the opportunities that stood out in comparison to some of the other regions.
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned, Chris, obviously the opportunity to supply materials for, the other industries is a great opportunity. And in a response to a question relating to the perceptions of, mining contributing towards greener technology and the energy transition, 44% of Australian respondents see the critical role in delivering resources required for green technologies and the transition as an opportunity, compared to 41% globally. So 44 here, 41 globally.
Yep, thank you. And Sarah, were there any surprises for you in some of these findings?
I think, thanks, Chris. I think overall, many of the things came out of the report weren't surprising, but it was really nice to actually see it in the facts and figures to actually really understand and quantify where the thinking's at. But a couple did sort of stand out to me, and I think in particular, when it comes to the ESG side of things and where we consider important, health safety is still really critical, and then also things like the quality of employment. And then when you flip that across to then some of the results that came around where the priority areas for innovation, it was interesting to see things like ventilation, hoisting, some of those areas that perhaps don't get as much attention when we're talking about electrification. We focus really heavily often, on just the actual equipment and the fleet itself, but looking at those sort of more broader areas, which I sort of see those two linking together when, looking at the health and the safety concerns, particularly around ventilation, particularly the conversations around diesel particulates and how that all kind of links together. But I also say that focus from the innovation, where it is more broad than just the vehicle, really reinforces the point that I think it was 79% of people are saying that this is actually about essentially a whole of system integration. It's not just one part that we need to electrify or decarbonize. It is actually about the whole system. So those were the ones that kind of stood out to me, but it is wonderful to see some of these things that are probably gut feel actually written down and being able to be quantified.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the findings that surprised me a bit was that only 39% of Australian businesses anticipated significant or complete transformation of their operations over the next 5 years. And, a lot of the conversation that happens here in Australia at conferences we go to, and I just mentioned Mine Expo, is really focused on that decarbonization, is really focused on that energy transition piece. And really to do it right, and to do it right not only from a business level, but from an industry level, there is significant transformation which will have to be made. And so to me, that 39% seems a little bit low, because that means a whole lot of other people, 60%, basically don't think that's going to happen. So to me, there's a bit of a gap there. Stuart, I'm just wondering how you perceive that percentage, or is it more optimistic that almost 40% see this transformation happening, and we just got to bring the other 60% along?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at the categorization that was put into the survey. And you're correct. 39% said that they expect a significant transformation. But if you consider, Chris, that over and above the 39% expecting significant change, a further 11% are expecting a total overhaul of the operations over the next 5 years. So that brings the number up to 50%.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in addition, there are those that see moderate change. So, without a doubt, Australian mining companies are on a path to transformation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And given that too, where do you think the gaps are in that thinking? Do you think that there are some significant things that the industry needs to be developing, perhaps to push that percentage up a bit more? And Stuart, I'll go to you, and then Sarah, I'll throw that question to you as well.
Well, you're right,
Yep.
Chris. I mean, there's still potential gaps, and 32% of miners felt that they were behind schedule to meet their decarbonisation goals. But it's as we've mentioned in the discussion around the data, we need more collaboration. Depending on which approach miners adopt, all of these things need to be considered. I think there needs to be a lot of thought leadership in the sector coming out of the mining community to make the needle shift, so to speak.
Yeah, agreed. And Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of I think that stood out to me as well, Chris. And I think you think about where the sector's been over the last couple of years, and there were some pretty aggressive targets set for 2030 strategies. We're starting to see people sort of back away from that a little bit. There's still the 2050 targets and those kind of things. And I wonder, as we're getting into it more, realizing just how big some of the challenges actually are. We know that some of the technology is not, while it's available, we know that the battery tech isn't quite where it needs to be in some of the different areas, but we are seeing some great efficiencies coming out of the equipment and what it can look like. But it's that whole integrated approach, as Stuart talked about, which I think is a challenge that the industry's had, regardless of whether we're talking about decarbonisation or not. And so I think, perhaps the realisation of where it's heading to, but I think there's also the fundamental, transition requires transmission. And I think that some of the challenges in Australia as well is, where is our power actually coming from, and what does that look like in terms of driving the decarbonisation issue as well. So I think it's just, we've set some aggressive targets, and now it's actually what is actually going to be required to achieve those, and how do we move quickly. But the encouraging bit, as you said, Stuart, is that 77% of people do see that the technology is available. It's how do we bring it all together?
Yeah, agreed.
Good point. Now, can I just remind people that you have an opportunity to ask questions? Just click on that Q&A box and you should be able to ask those questions, and we'll address those as we go along. So Sarah, I'll stick with you, just focusing on that technology piece, because it is exciting that 77% of people said that technology is available. Regarding electrification and technological integration, which are key drivers for decarbonization, what are some of the most promising technologies that you are seeing are making the biggest impact now? And maybe let's look out 5 years in terms of that decarbonization.
Yeah. Look, for me, and my answer probably is a little bit biased given the work that we're doing in the digital technology space. But I think the really rapid evolution that we're seeing in digital technology, machine learning, generative AI, I think is certainly the most promising. And I think we've been talking for a long time, as I mentioned before, this whole system integration, digital connection, that's been an issue that's been existing for a long time in the industry. How do we actually, connect the different parts of the value chain? How do we reduce those silos and stop that sort of subsystem optimization and really be able to look at it from a whole? And I think, there's been a lot of time and money put into these types of technologies over the years, but the technology hasn't quite been there. And I think with what we're seeing now with the advancements and how quickly it's moving, I think that's really exciting because the technology is now actually catching up to the aspiration. And I think the other part to that is that when we've been looking at these whole of system technologies in the past, it has just been optimizing for things like just cost and volume and quality to an extent. But we're now moving into this world where it is cost, volume, quality, energy, emissions, water, social. Those levers for optimization are actually far too great for the existing structures, the existing systems to be able to optimize for that whole. And that's where I think the onset of where we're seeing generative AI, machine learning and things going, that's going to really help us bring this together and actually then really help drive where we need to get to with that whole of system approach for decarbonisation, electrification, etc.
Yep. Great response. And just following on from that and looking at some of the findings of the report, ESG was a focus, and safety is consistently a top ESG priority for Australian miners and indeed miners all around the world. And Stuart, to you, how do you see the role of safety evolving in the context of decarbonization and other ESG goals?
Chris, I believe it's going to become even more intrinsically part of the mine operations, from the perspective that as mining companies adopt these new technologies such as electrification, digitalization, etc. If you consider the transition to electrical mine haul trucks, for instance, obviously it's going to reduce emissions, but what will this mean for operators? So, someone who's used to operating diesel-powered equipment is now getting involved in, charging and electrical circuits. So, probably need to rethink our standards and procedures. But if you take it further, I mean, even consider the trend towards automation and digitalization. The technology facilitates optimization of processes and energy efficiency and reduces risk of hazardous physical tasks. But it does also introduce, different things like cybersecurity concerns. If you think about automated machinery, and I'm thinking even further to robotics in mining, for instance, implementation of barriers and guarding to prevent, injury to humans, it's kind of becoming a new way to work. You can even think about, the different materials, because as we, look at batteries and carbon capture, you could see workers exposed to new chemical and physical hazards, extracting lithium, cobalt, nickel for battery manufacture. These are evolving risks that our safety standards will need to evolve to address.
Yeah, all really good points there. Now, we do have a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to start with a first one for you, Stuart. How significant will hoisting be for decarbonizing deep underground mines? What new technology is ABB working on in this space?
ABB has some very good solutions around hoisting, and certainly I think we're a world leader in the technology around this. Australian miners kind of rated this as one of the least, I guess, positions they're going to take or improve on at this stage. But I mean, it's not to say that that won't change in the future. It was the smallest thing to, I mean, I think ventilation and other things became higher on the list than mine hoists.
Yeah. Sarah, are you seeing anything, because this question is specifically focused on hoisting, but there were some other things mentioned. What do you, as far as decarbonizing deep underground mines, what kind of exciting technology are you seeing?
Yeah, look, I think just rounding out on that hoisting one, I think what we're seeing is people are wanting to understand what are their options and what are the best options to actually drive out that decarbonisation. So, is it just electrifying the fleet? What can I do with hoist? What's the impact on ventilation? And actually looking at that and looking at the whole of system thing. I think, so all of those areas have actually got to come into play. And I think this is the one of the things is how are miners making the decisions around still, coming back to the financial and the decarbonisation side. How do you actually make those trade-offs and actually understand what it looks like? And what are the points in time that you actually need to make the decisions about, which technology I invest in when? There was a lot of question around, do you go holistic, do you go incremental? And I think that really depends on the operation. But I think, we're seeing the battery tech advancing really rapidly now. The automation side of things is advancing and robotics and what's happening with that. So I think it's all of these bits that we've been building over the years are actually starting to come together.
And how do you make that decision of where to invest first, Sarah? And then I'll go to Stuart. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It's a really tricky one, and I think it depends on the different operations and where is that operation at. And I think this is where the traditional models that we've used to just value investment decisions just against cost and volume. We've got to expand the types of models we're actually using to take into consideration these other elements and then decide what are those trade-offs and what does it look like. So I think it depends on the operation, but we also need to expand our way of decision making. And, again, some of the digital tools, and that's some of the work we're actually doing in idoba is around advancing those modeling options so that people can understand holistically where do you invest and when, and do it based on the technology, the emissions, and the financial side, and pulling all those things together.
Stuart, over to you with that question. What are your customers saying to you, and what are some of those priorities when making these financial decisions?
Look, I agree with Sarah in that every mine's going to be different, and we do see a lot of disparity in different approaches. And of course, every approach has its merit. It's a matter of balancing immediate operational needs against obviously the long-term sustainability goals. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it's quite imperative for miners to reach out to the community and engage with integrators and people that can assist with this, because miners are good at mining. Perhaps they need someone else to come in and support them when it comes to digitalization, automation, electrification type technologies.
Absolutely. So the next question is focused on workforce, and this was one of the barriers that was identified, certainly in the research, is the limited experience and having a skilled workforce to help us through this transition. And the question, it says, one of the challenges we are seeing is the upskilling of our workforce to learn the new systems such as battery tech, photovoltaic cell management. Our heavy diesel fitters are sorry, just things are moving around. Sorry. Our heavy diesel fitters are in short demand at the moment, but will these be replaced in other solutions? And what do we need to upskill? Sorry, that wasn't very elegantly said, but basically, what do we need to do? Where do we need to upskill? And what are we going to do about a future workforce? Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take this one. So I think it's really interesting. I think there's two parts to this question, and I think one of the challenges we've got in the industry is I think we have had a real reliance on individuals and the knowledge that those individuals have, and we've got this kind of curve that we work through around how you get experience and what you step through to actually get to those different layers, and that takes a really long time. I think we've got to find ways through technology and things to actually capture and harness that knowledge to actually accelerate the learning curve for people to be able to actually make better decisions and be able to create new solutions. On the actual more skilled labor side of things, it's an interesting challenge, and I'm gonna give an example of my nephew actually, who went into a diesel mechanic trade and then got partway into it and then went, oh, actually, I'm not sure where the future's actually going, and actually left that apprenticeship and actually went to an electrical apprenticeship. So I think there's work we've got to do as an industry to be able to show the next generation what the path is in terms of what this looks like and where we see it all going. But I think also just being able to demonstrate that this is an industry that is going to continue to grow, and the excitement that the executives see around what happens with decarbonisation, electrification, we need to actually get that out there and really be able to educate these next generations coming through that, there's amazing technology out there, there's amazing opportunities, but it's multifaceted, and I think it's no surprise that even in the ESG side, workforce and the challenges with that is a real challenge.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to as well, we are part of the solution, not the problem, which we're often viewed by the public and by the younger generation about. Stuart, what about you? How are we going to tackle those workforce and skills issues?
Well, as I mentioned in the discussion, I think technology can really help support, this change. We've in different countries around the world, ABB have implemented remote operation center with digital backbones, and people can now work, from a more comfortable central control room rather than having to fly in, fly out to a remote site. So there are all sorts of opportunities like that will be able to, diversify our workforces, but also attract the new generation who are more interested in, these new technologies than perhaps they were in, traditional mining approaches.
Yeah. Just on that, we have another question. Do you foresee these decarbonization technologies being implemented for new mines or retrofitted into existing mines? Does compulsory carbon reporting in Australia drive switch over to electrification? I'll throw that to either one of you.
I can jump in, and it probably goes back to that same answer before around it does depend on where the operations are. And I think I often give a bit of an analogy around this, around like the fixed line phone and the mobile phone infrastructure, that if you think about existing operations, it's like a fixed line phone. And when the mobile phone came out, you could initially just make phone calls, then you could do text messages, then you could play Snake, and now, you can do everything you need to on that platform. But then equally, in many countries in Africa, they actually skipped the fixed line phone infrastructure altogether, and we just went straight to the mobile phone technologies. So I think we will see a bit of a two-speed thing happening. I think new operations will start to look at it more holistically, and how do they start with the way that they intend to end. And then we'll see more incremental in those more, operations that are well established, perhaps have shorter mine life and those kind of things. So I think it will be a bit of both. When the compulsory reporting comes out, though, I think that will actually start to drive some changes. But I still think, my view is anyway, that we'll see a bit of a combination approach for quite a while.
Thank you, Sarah. Stuart, you want to make a comment on that? I can see you
Yeah, I think
shaking your
I
head in
agree.
agreement.
Yeah, sure. I agree with Sarah. Probably the new greenfield mines obviously offer that opportunity to plan everything with a clean sheet of paper. And there's benefits to the holistic approach versus the incremental approach. But if we go back to the investment challenges, then the incremental approach can give you some changes quite quickly. It may take longer, but certainly, it's quite an acceptable approach, and many miners, especially the brownfield ones, I guess, will go that way.
Yeah, I mean, you got to start somewhere. So,
exactly. Yeah.
And people, we know in the mining industry that we're always first to be second. And so that incremental approach gets people used to adopting those new technologies and putting new systems in place. So at least we're starting. So there is a question about AI here. In your opinion, how is AI, or how will AI play a role in the modernization of the mining industry, particularly with decarbonization?
I think it goes back to what I touched on earlier, is that it's going to help us give a lot more insights into a lot of different areas. It's still, when we look at the large language processing models of the likes of ChatGPT and things, it's still quite broad, and we're seeing, some really specific applications of AI as well. But I think as we start to move into areas where we're dealing with the large volumes of data and what it looks like, and being able to really rapidly capture that knowledge and the insights to gain the impact, we'll see that really starting to evolve. But it goes back to what I said as well, traditionally we have been able to just optimize on cost and volume and quality, and now we're going to have this additional lever that we're going to have to optimize upon. And if you think about that in the context of an operation, if a maintenance manager decides he wants to reduce costs here but it increases emissions over here, how do you actually manage those trade-offs? AI is going to assist us with actually being able to get everything intelligent, integrated. But then the important bit is then how do we distribute that decision-making to the individuals? And it's not AI in itself. There's a lot of different techniques that we can be using in digital technology to bring it together. But AI, I think, is certainly going to help us do it faster and more efficiently and in a learning way.
Stuart, what are you saying with AI, and how is ABB using it in what you're doing?
Well, I think, Chris, obviously with more digitalization, modeling becomes easier, and I guess, miners will do more and more of that going forward. And certainly, AI is going to touch everything across every industry, but I think it'll certainly assist in those modeling type scenarios, best outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about collaboration, because we talked about it in the report. There were statistics that said, partnership is certainly the key, and partnering with the ecosystem is very important. And, we talk about collaboration, Austmine, that's what we're built on. We always say collaboration is the key to getting things done, but there are barriers to collaboration. And it was really exciting, some of the announcements at Mine Expo on the partnerships that were formed there. So what do you think are some of those key things that we need to do to really truly partner and accelerate what we're doing in this decarbonization and energy transition space? And Stuart, I might come to you first on that.
I think it's already happening, Chris, in the sense that miners are reaching out and they're looking for support in this decarbonization journey. Many years ago, I remember we were almost having to bang down the doors to get heard. But now miners are actually inviting us in and talking to us about these are their plans. What can ABB bring to the party? So I think it's already underway. Those sort of partnerships are there. And then from a supplier perspective, we can't do all of it ourselves. So for instance, in the electrification mine haul type space, we're partnering with truck manufacturers, for instance, because certainly we don't build trucks, but the electrification aspects and the charging we do. So those sort of things I think are going to become more and more prevalent in this journey.
Right. Sarah, you want to comment on that collaboration piece? So important
Yeah.
for the industry.
It's really important, and I think it is actually something we've really struggled with as a sector as well. But I think the thing about decarbonisation as well is it actually drives us to look at it more holistically about what is the end picture that we're actually striving towards. When it was just about productivity gains and partnering around that, there wasn't as big a sort of I guess end vision of where it was going, and that it is actually for sort of the greater good, dare I say. But there is still lots of challenges in that partnering side of things. But I think, as Stuart said, we're certainly seeing a lot more openness, a lot more, I guess, humility in saying, hey, we don't have the answers, and in fact, we don't have to have the answers. So who can we work with, and how can we work together on that? And then even from a supplier to supplier, from small businesses to larger businesses, I think we're seeing, it used to be very black and white about, well, you do this and we do this. And as long as there's no grey areas, we can actually work together. But I'm certainly starting to see a lot more of where there is grey areas, of actually seeing the opportunities of actually being better in the grey areas, as well as the extra areas where two companies can actually come together. I always still say that we still have big opportunities in procurement in different areas to actually help facilitate those collaborations. So that's one big area of innovation that's required. But it is happening. And we're seeing it accelerate a lot more as well.
Excellent. Now there are a couple of questions around hoisting, and I don't know, Stuart, do you have expertise in hoisting at all?
A certain amount. I'm certainly not an expert, but we obviously it's a technology which we do deliver.
Okay. So how about, I'll ask this, what energy can we generate from our hoisting?
Well, I mean, obviously there are solutions around regenerative opportunities from hoisting. So those sort of things ABB does deliver today already. It's I guess there's others in the market that do it as well, but the load that is in a hoist on the downward trend on the downward cycle of the hoisting obviously can also be used to regenerate into the grid, and so that is used already and available today.
Okay. Well, maybe if that person wants to know more about the hoisting, they can reach out to you directly.
We can put them in touch with some experts. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. We are running out of time quickly. Just two more questions. I'll take one from the audience, and then I have one for both of you. So somebody says really informative discussion. So thank you. Do you think technology investment procrastination will continue to be a barrier to the transitional needs in all areas that you've touched on? Or is it the case that they don't know what they don't know and not wanting to be the bleeding edge?
So it's an interesting question. Stu, do you want to go first?
No, you go.
And look, it comes down to that whole thing about, where we're at with adoption. And I think, I always say that everybody wants to transform and nobody wants to change. And, you wonder whether some of these, we set these targets, yes, we're going to do this transformation. Oh, hang on, I've got to change and do something different. I come back to it time and time again, that technology and digital and all these changes are actually hugely about people. And I think so often the technologies don't fail because the technology is not good. It fails because we don't put the effort into the people and process and actually understand the end state of where we want to be. And it's probably really, I don't know if it's controversial, but even when we look at autonomous trucks, you could argue that in many of our operations, we actually still only have remote control trucks because we're still operating the same way. The trucks are just operating autonomously without somebody in the cab. We've actually got to embrace that this is going to require change in the way that we actually do our processes, in the way that we engage people, in the way that we work. And so I think those conversations are starting to increase, but I think often that is actually what drives some of the procrastination. It's just that the fear of actually changing the people and process side. The technology is going to keep evolving, and the technology is, in largely pretty good. It's that element that we've got to really change in mining.
Agree. Stuart, you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, the data supports that, as we said, at least 50% expecting, significant change in their processes over 5 years. So I'd say that the needle is moving. Of course, we know, and we've said that investment is one of the barriers, but I think more and more miners are going to see that, this is an absolute necessity. So I see less reticence going forward and more adoption of new technology.
Okay. So we've come to our end of our time, but just one quick question. So over the next, say, 5 years, what is the one thing that you're most excited about in terms of technology when it comes to decarbonization for the Australian mining industry? And Sarah, I'll go to you first, and then Stuart. And you can have the last word, Stuart, in terms of reinforcing anything you want from the survey as well.
Look, I think it just echoes a lot of what I've talked about. This report is really exciting because it actually puts a lot of these things quite tangible in terms of what some of the gut feels were. But the exciting thing for me is I think actually decarbonisation, electrification actually is going to drive a lot of that change of bringing the whole of system together and actually looking at that true transformation that we need in the industry. And I think it's going to open up a whole bunch of other possibilities when we start looking at all the different levers on which we optimize for. I'm really excited about what that looks like.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And Stuart?
Yeah, I'd say the mining industry in the past has kind of been seen as a late adopter of new technology, but I see this has changed dramatically and it's continuing to evolve and change quite rapidly now. So I think we're in for an exhilarating ride. And I think it's a great time to be involved in the mining industry. I really do. And we're going to see a lot over the next 5 years, which will attract, all those Gen Z and others to the industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. It is a very exciting time to be part of the mining industry, and so many great technologies coming out, which are not only applicable to mining, but right across many, many different industries. So we've run out of time, unfortunately. I think it's been a great discussion. I'd like to thank Stuart Cowie from ABB and Sarah Coleman from idoba for this discussion today. Also, a reminder, the report will come out sometime before the end of the month. If you didn't pick up the QR code in the presentation, Austmine will be sending out an email, which will provide a link for you to register for the report. I'm very excited to see the whole thing. I love this kind of data. It helps us make decisions. And I think, it is very exciting what's happening. So no doubt this will be a very informative report for everyone. So thank you very much for joining us today, and hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.